Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Dorian, Chris Brown, they are here with me. We talked about Michigan, Ohio State, but there was another Big Ten team. The Big Ten team that, first of all, this is exactly what we were expecting from the Big Ten.
Yep.
Now it might not have been Michigan up there with Illinois, and it might not have been Ohio State up there with Illinois. Now that I think about it, but we were expecting the Big Ten to have a really important part in what's at the top of the sport. And right now they got 3 of the 5 teams in the AP poll. We're talking about Illinois. They're now 16-5. They took care of business in a place that Michigan didn't go and take care of business, and they took care of business in a pretty convincing fashion, 94-63 win at Minnesota. Illinois quietly in the context of the Michigan-Ohio State game, but they've now won. The last time they lost was to Ohio State forever ago. That game was on, I believe, January 16th. So it's been over a month since Illinois lost. Had a couple postponed games, of course, in there, most notably against Michigan. But the Illini taking care of business and just half a game back in the Big Ten standings at 12-3, and have really established themselves as that team that we thought they were going to be before the season started.
Yeah, to me, I'm right there with you that Ohio State should not be dropped out of the 4th spot in the AP poll, especially because it's not like Illinois went out there and got a top 25 win this weekend. Mm-hmm. They beat a fine Minnesota team now that crushed them. But
Minnesota's 6-10 in conference. Can we talk about that? I was blown away by that. That's not. I think of Minnesota as a better team than that.
Yep. They got the rough stretch, and it hasn't gone.
It's a little like Northwestern, not quite as bad as Northwestern, who's now 3-13 in conference, but still.
Right. So I'm not here to say that Illinois is better, or more importantly to me, more consistent than Ohio State, because they're not. Mm-hmm. But they just obliterated Minnesota. They're 11-2 in their last 13 games. Dosunmu now has 2 triple doubles, and I believe it's his last 4 games. Like you said, he's the best player in the country right now. So all I'm saying is that and when you pair that with the fact that Houston lost in the AAC, and Virginia had a terrible week.
Yep, just an awful week.
Awful week. We've been waiting to see who might actually make this debate interesting about the top 4, and who might be the team if Ohio State loses 2 games in a row that catches them. And I am 100% willing to put Illinois in that spot now. Am I concerned that they then go out and lose a couple games that they shouldn't, or lose to Michigan or Ohio State or something, and a game that they shouldn't? Yeah. Do I feel great about their ability to win 6 consecutive games? No. But ceiling-wise, in terms of potential, they are now looking to be every bit as good as we thought they are. And so you pair that with the weeks everybody else around them had, and if something happens, I can see them making a Final Four. To me, they are team number 5, and they are in the same stratosphere as Michigan and Ohio State. Maybe not quite the same part of the stratosphere, if we're going to get that technical, but I'm drawing the line after Illinois, not before Illinois. And ultimately, my larger point is just simply, if one of these 2 teams, these teams being Gonzaga and Baylor, aren't going to win the national championship, I find it hard to believe it's going to be somebody that's not in the Big Ten because of these 3 teams.
Which would be significant, because it's been like 20 years since a Big Ten team won a national championship.
It's the Michigan State team in 2000.
I think so. I think you're right. They beat Northwestern, who hasn't won a game since they started 3-0 in the Big Ten, by the way. Yikes. They've lost 13 straight. The last time they won a game was Ohio State, actually, on December 26th. That was the last time Northwestern won a basketball game. They were 3-0 in conference at that point. Shouts to the Wildcats. But that team, Illinois only beat them by 7 at home, because Dosunmu had 13 points, and that was it. Mm-hmm. Coburn was good. Coburn is a walking double-double at this point, but Illinois hasn't lost in a long time because Dosunmu's been really good, and the time when he was, at least recently, not great, was a 73-66 win. It was Northwestern, so it didn't matter. And when talking about Final Four potential, right? If you get DeSumo for the right 2 weeks, absolutely, they can beat almost anybody in the country if DeSumo has the right 2 weeks. If he has the wrong second weekend, then it gets pretty sketchy pretty quickly. I mean, they only beat Nebraska, who's 4-12 and 0-9 in conference, by 5. Now that was DeSumo. DeSumo had 31, but nobody around him other than Coburn had really anything, which also gets to my point even more, is that if it's not Coburn and it's not DeSumo, it's nobody on Illinois, at least consistently, which is why I'll always have hesitations about them as a Final Four team for more reasons other than hesitations about them getting to the Final Four for more reasons than there are 4 teams that I think are better than they are. But yeah, they've been impressive and flexed their muscles this weekend over there in Minnesota. 31. I mean, Minnesota's not 31 points worse at home than Illinois, but they got smoked.
Yeah, they were Minnesota 13-1 inside Williams Arena until this weekend, and then Illinois just looked at that record for Minnesota at home and then just threw it on the ground and stomped on it repeatedly. Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I think right, this is the upside we knew that Illinois was we thought that Illinois was capable of heading into the season. I guess the best thing was sort of the best way to phrase sort of my thought process, which I think is very similar to you guys, is that I think there's a scenario in which, right, maybe Ohio State has a hiccup, they drop a game or two, Illinois keeps winning here over the next week or so, and there is a change maybe in the AP top 25. And I wouldn't say that that's unwarranted. I wouldn't say that that's unwarranted necessarily. And I'm right there with you in thinking that that's the team that's in the position to capitalize if there is, and get that 1 seed potentially if something were to happen to Ohio State or something like that. But I think there's also a scenario in which those teams are flipped in the AP poll and my, hypothetical power rankings in my head don't change.
Yep.
Because there's just, like you guys have said repeatedly, Illinois, when things are going right, when DeSumo is firing on all cylinders, their upside is right there. But there's just, and I've sort of made my sort of stance on this and liking teams that can win in several different ways. And if 1 or 2 players aren't performing at a high level, that there's still logical pathways to compete against the top teams. And Illinois just isn't set up that same way. So there's just a realistic chance, and I'm not predicting this, but where Illinois would find themselves in the top 4 or potentially get a 1 seed. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve it or that they're not capable of a Final Four run, but I'm not going to necessarily be predicting them over an Ohio State team that maybe slips up for a couple games and then gets it straightened out.
I want to ask a question. Do you have any faith in an ACC team to get past the Sweet 16? Any real faith? Because right, it could be Florida State, but this is also a Florida State team that lost to UCF and has lost to Clemson and lost to Georgia Tech. So they have their days when they have a really hard time scoring the basketball. Virginia had maybe the worst week of any quality team in the season, right? In terms of how we feel about Virginia just 7 days after, compared to how we felt about them 7 days ago. Right. But those are the 2 teams right after that. It's Virginia Tech, who's 3rd in the conference, and then North Carolina and Louisville. And pretty quickly we get to teams that we're really debating whether or not they're going to win 1 game,
right,
let alone
we're on
3.
the bubble there.
Right, let alone
Right.
3. Do you have any faith, specifically Florida State and Virginia, I suppose? Do you have faith in either team to put together 3 straight wins? And especially that, right, and the lowest, in the most recent bracketology, at least from Lenardi at ESPN, Virginia was a 3. And I'm not finding the Florida State boys immediately here. They were a 4. So, right, you're getting a 5 seed in the second round. You're getting a 6 seed in the second round. You're getting a 1 seed in the Sweet 16, a 2 seed in the Sweet 16. You're playing quality teams. I'm not sure I have faith in either of those teams to beat teams of that quality. And I feel even more so about that way than I did than I did a week ago, especially after Virginia's massive hiccup of a week.
You said get past the Sweet 16 as in make the Elite Eight.
Yeah, because I think if you're a 2 or 3, if you're a 3 or 4 seed, especially a 3 seed, if you're a 3 seed, I'm almost expecting you to, barring some situations where that 6 seed is just much better than an actual 6 seed. I'm expecting you to get to the Sweet 16, which is why I said win a Sweet 16 game, because I still think I would still probably predict, depending on the bracket, of course, but there would have to be specific teams for me to not predict a 4 seed Virginia team to not get to the Sweet 16 just because they're a 4 seed Virginia team.
Yeah. Okay. So my answer is no. I have no confidence whatsoever. I am very confident in Florida State's ability to play up to its potential in the NCAA tournament, which to me means making the Sweet 16.
Sure.
They're one of those teams that I just refuse to bet against at this point. Michigan's on that list. Maybe a little bit shakier because Juwan Howard hasn't done it, but this is also the best Michigan team we've seen in a couple years at least. So I'm not saying I'm going to pick Michigan to lose in the round of 32 or anything, but traditionally, right, the programs that they always show up and do what they're supposed to in March. Florida State is high on that list.
At least recently, with Leonard.
Right. The way that he's got this thing going with his 10, 11 dudes, he runs out there and they just play really hard and really aggressive, and then some of them foul, and then he brings in the second group, and this whole system they got going.
Yeah.
But to me, the question is, well, what does playing up to their potential mean? And I'm right there with you. They're just not one of the best 8 teams in the country. I would not be stunned if they made a deep run. I really like their upside, but they've had too many hiccups and they've been too shaky for me to be confident in that. So I have absolutely no faith that we're going to. I wouldn't rule out both of them making it, but your question of what's your confidence level that you're going to book a spot for the ACC in the Elite Eight, not high at all.
Yeah. I don't have much to add. I mean, the ceiling is there for Florida State if things go right, but there's just not enough. I don't have enough confidence that they haven't given me enough confidence that things are going to go right long enough that they're going to be able to string together that kind of an extended stretch without some of these hiccups that we've seen them have this season.
Where do you want to go from here, Chris?
Let's talk a little bit about Tennessee.
Please, let's talk about the SEC.
Let's start talking about the SEC. So the Volunteers, every time it looks like they're getting back on track this season, or potentially getting back on track, they fall apart right away. Roughly 2 weeks ago, they were trailing Kentucky by 10 points on the road, and then they rallied to come back and win 82-71. And then this weekend, they were at home against Kentucky. And it was the Wildcats that went on a 22-4 run in the first half. They took control. They led by as many as 21. Tennessee basically looked lifeless much of this game. And Rick Barnes talked post-game about how he thinks it's not about an inability to respond to adversity, but rather an inability to handle success. He says that they win these games, they might get back on track, and then all this...
I love that. That's an all-time quote. That has to be.
That's good. That's. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it makes some sense. We always talk about, handling when things get rough, but there's also this whole element of when you think you're back on track, when you get a big win or at least a significant win, that it's easy to sort of, you have to keep the right mindset so that you don't fall back into some of your old bad habits. And they've just been so inconsistent in SEC play.
I'm real worried about a team who's in their bag about a win at home against South Carolina. It's not like they had won 10 in a row.
Yeah.
They had lost
right.
They had lost half of the last 2 games that they had played.
Right.
And they lost by double digits to LSU, who is a fine team but not a great one. If we're really feeling ourselves because we won by 20 against a South Carolina team that's 5-10 and 3-8 in a pretty subpar SEC, then we got some work to do.
and look at the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just gonna say how their 3 most recent losses are just not excusable things. They scored under 0.8 points per possession against Ole Miss. They scored just 65 points against a bad LSU defense, and they got rocked at home by Kentucky. Anyway, what were you gonna say, Josh?
And look at the broader picture of what's happened to this Tennessee program, right? That team that was number 1 in the country didn't really live up to the hype in the NCAA tournament. And now you got this group who, and I think when I hear Rick Barnes say that, I hear that from the beginning of the season, not necessarily. Now, I don't know the complete context and how he answered that, but I see that is a 100% spot on from the right. This team was positioned as, well, if you don't trust all of these new Kentucky guys, because this is the newest Kentucky team John Calipari's ever had, the team that's right there talent-wise with them, with the other 5-star freshmen and the experienced guys coming back, and the coach who's done it before is Tennessee with Rick Barnes. Right? There's a reason everybody was picking them to win the SEC right before the season started and talking about this could be a Final Four team. This is a top 5 team in the country. And clearly they just didn't know how to deal with that because, right, they've been inconsistent basically from the get-go. They had that delayed start. Then they were okay for a little bit. Then they started losing.
Well, they were great at the beginning because they played nobody. I mean, right before conference play, they had an 80-60 win, a 102-66 win, and a 103-49. They doubled up App State, doubled them up, and as part of their non-conference. So that doesn't, to your point, that doesn't help either. Now, they didn't play anybody. They played Colorado, who has turned out to be a quality basketball team. But other than that, if they got too big for their britches, they shouldn't have because they didn't play anybody really quality. And Colorado is a much better team now than they were in November. But your point, to reinforce your point.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where I think he's spot on, that it's hard to appreciate that aspect of it. You've got these guys coming in, and there weren't really high expectations after Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield left, but all of a sudden, it just sort of clicked. You got a couple elite recruits. So all of a sudden, this team looks really good on paper, and everybody's talking about you're the best team in your conference. You're a potential national title contender. You got to learn how to deal with that when you're a program that's not used to it. Duke doesn't have a problem with that. Now, you could talk about Duke coming up short in the NCAA tournament, but K knows how to deal with that. Kansas doesn't have to worry about that. Gonzaga, Mark Few knows exactly what's expected of his team every single season and how to deal with that. And Villanova, you can go down the list. I mean, it's different when you're Illinois, when you're Tennessee.
But to a certain extent, they did have teams that lived up to the hype recently. It's just not the same players. But in theory, Rick Barnes should be able to.
Right, Rick Barnes knows how to do this, and even go back to Kevin Durant at Texas. Yeah,
right. So it's a little like you're welcome to. I mean, Rick Barnes should know how to handle success. He should know how to. I mean, him saying that is not a knock on his players. It's a knock on him for not teaching his dudes. And he was the coach at Texas when you had really, really high quality Texas teams. So, it's. Right, that Gonzaga team, I mean, Jalen Suggs doesn't know, but Mark Few knows, and the same can be said for Tennessee. But yeah, it is Virginia to a certain extent is this year's Virginia as well, but Virginia's defense isn't elite the way that it usually is. But Tennessee, 72nd at KenPom in offense, 5th in defense, right? If the other team has a good shooting night, they're going to struggle to beat even okay basketball teams with consistency, right? I believe they're either 6-6 or 6-5 in their last 11 games. Well, they couldn't be 6-6 in their last 11 games. That's a dumb thing to say. But right, if you're not completely suffocating and completely elite on the defensive end, even if you're really good, and the other team has a decent night, I mean, they just can't consistently score the basketball to save their lives, and that puts you in a lot of weird situations.
Anything else on Tennessee?
No. On the SEC side of things, real quick, Alabama tried their darndest to lose to Vanderbilt at home over the weekend. Right, Vanderbilt did that thing where they don't want to win basketball games, so they were able to, right, but Javon Quinterly had to make a free throw with 4 seconds left to make the score a 4-point game, so that the last possession was ultimately pointless. But apart from Alabama reinforcing to me that they could either have the right 2 weekends and go to the Elite Eight, or have the wrong first day and lose to even to a 15 seed if they really have a bad day. I don't have a whole lot else with the SEC.
Yeah, that's the thing. Every time I feel like I'm going almost, I've sort of blamed myself for going on a little bit of a mini roller coaster with Alabama, like of just sort of like getting overly excited and overly pessimistic when I sort of just need to come down in the middle and say like, okay, well, there's a chance they can go on this great run. They have that ability, but there's also clear weaknesses or sort of limitations for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just not nearly as scary when they don't shoot the ball well, and that's
Yeah.
a good team with a lot of firepower in a nutshell, right? They're going to be really overwhelming when they shoot it well, right? And they have a good defense, so it's not only their offense, but good teams that shoot it, there are a lot of good teams that can be really scary when they shoot the ball well. Alabama can be especially scary when they shoot the ball well, but when they don't, and they were 10 of 39 from the 3-point line against Vanderbilt, like they're just not nearly scary, which is not a knock. It's just true. And Alabama's not a great team. They're a good one, maybe even a really good one, but certainly not an elite one. Where you want to go, Josh?
I want to go to the bubble.
Talk to me.
Couple things real quick. Indiana, St. John's, unsurprisingly, horrendous losses.
Yeah, that's one of mine too. Yeah, go ahead.
You're right, Josh. We talked about this on the podcast on Monday, and I gave the Hoosiers a little bit more credit, and I shouldn't have. You're right. I shouldn't have. There you go.
I said I want to see Indiana get through these 2 games before they start playing the good teams.
Yep.
And see what happens. Because if they can't win these first 2, I do not think they're making the NCAA tournament. And what do you know? They lost to Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
And St. John's lost to DePaul, which is in a weekend where there were so many things that went right that they could have really helped themselves. And I wanted to believe the St. John's team was different. I just think they're a year away. That they just need a little bit more time to figure out how to do this, because they performed better in the Big East, but they left themselves a lot of work to do because they didn't start well, and that means you got a lot of work left to do when you lose to DePaul.
And right, and I think they're also in a good spot to, relative to the rest of the Big East next year, be maybe even better, right? Because I mean, we're talking about Creighton's going to lose everybody. Zagorowski, Ballack, they're all gone. At least those 2 guys. Villanova is going to lose at least Colin Gillespie. Gillespie's a senior.
Probably Jeremiah Robinson
and I'm
Earl.
guessing Jeremiah Robinson Earl will be gone as well. So that's the top of your conference right there. Right, Xavier will have some guys coming back, but also they won't have everything coming back. The Big East, right, nobody's sitting pretty to be the front. Right, Villanova will still be up there because they'll reload. It's Jay Wright, and they'll still be a top 25 team. But there's room for St. John's to really be if they take the step in the right direction that we expect them to with a really young, talented team, they should be in an even better spot next year. But there you go. Death, taxes, and St. John's not winning games they need to.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, my final takeaway point was just about IU as well. Like, they gave up 52, allowed Michigan State to score 52 points in the final 20 minutes of that game. Now they have a quad 3 team to a quad 3 loss to a team that entered the game, at least in Michigan State, 90th in the net rankings. They're falling out of projected tournament fields right now. IU is, and like you guys have mentioned, alluded to, their schedule to end the season is not an easy one. They've got Rutgers, Michigan State again, and then Purdue to end the season. So their backs very much up against the wall. And so they've got a lot of work cut out for them now. Otherwise, I mean, they're gonna have to show something that we just haven't seen with them from with any consistency. They're gonna have to do like a extreme 180 here in the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, it's gonna be they're not gonna be hearing their name on Selection Sunday.
I'm also just gonna
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm just gonna throw this out there quick too. If Michigan State wins out, Michigan State's gonna make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, they kept this little sliver alive of their.
And
hope.
have you seen the schedule?
Illinois, Ohio State, Maryland, Indiana, Michigan,
okay.
Michigan.
Michigan. Yeah. Yeah. 4 games
Um,
against top 5 teams.
By the way,
Yes.
they're projected to lose all 6 of those games.
I'm sure they are.
Even the one at home to Indiana, Ken Palm is still projecting them to lose.
And rightfully so. I'm just saying, if they pull it off, they're going to make it.
I mean,
The last thing I'll say about Indiana is they do have opportunities. This is a team that beat Michigan State twice last year, a couple years ago, whenever that was. And this is also Archie Miller, who's probably, like, at least it's got to be in the back of his mind that if he misses the NCAA tournament again this year, that, like, I mean, there's not a whole lot of foundation for him to stand on as to why he should keep his job. He can't seem to find a way to actually consistently win games in the Big Ten. We're running out of time with Archie Miller in Bloomington. We'd be running out of time regardless of, if based on his performance, regardless of where he is. But in Bloomington, it's even heightened because they still think out there that they're an elite college basketball program today, and that's just not what they are. But the expectation is that you win a lot of basketball games in Bloomington, and he just hasn't done that. So if I'm an Indiana fan, I almost am glad that they get these games against quality teams left, right? Because losing to Michigan isn't gonna change your place on the bubble, but beating Michigan is. Like, for example, if you put Maryland there instead of Michigan, you need to beat Maryland to stay in the conversation, and you just don't have a lot of faith in Indiana to win the games that they're supposed to win, hence why we're talking about them right now. But with Michigan on the schedule at home, with Purdue on the road, those are games that can bump your resume, and we've seen them beat teams that are better than they are, like beating Iowa a couple weeks ago. So that would be my only place to hang my hat, but there's not a ton of place to hang it. We're gonna take a short break.
I got one more thing.
Ooh, go for it. Is it about Texas? No. Okay.
UConn gets James Bouknight back. He was rusty and clearly not conditioned against Villanova, which makes sense considering he hasn't played for a while. They put up a good fight, fell apart down the stretch, and Villanova comfortably took care of the last 8 minutes or so. But with what else has happened on the bubble, and the fact that Bouknight's back, and the fact that they kind of just were able to keep their heads above water without him, I feel good about UConn moving forward here as they finish their season.
Sure. With that being said, by the way, 21 points on 7 of 17 shooting. It's not like he was right. He was a little inefficient, too many turnovers, but it's not like he was bad. And
no, he just ran out of gas. He had a great first half, and then
exactly. Coming up next, we'll take a break and then do winners and losers real quick before we get out of here. Watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.